They were tasked with guarding pilgrims and holding ground, yet for 9 years, they remained hidden beneath Jerusalem's most sacred site. Instead of engaging in battles and seeking glory, they dedicated themselves to digging. Upon their emergence, the world irrevocably changed. Their influence expanded rapidly, and their adversaries multiplied. Centuries later, their legacy continues to resonate through ancient stone vaults and forbidden historical accounts. One must ponder, what discovery did the Knights Templar make beneath Solomon's temple that compelled monarchs to yield and instilled fear in popes? A secret that might still be concealed today. Let the distractions of the world subside. Take a deep breath and envision a flickering torch in a dusty chamber, ancient stones exuding moisture in the profound silence. The past is poised to reveal a truth never intended to be heard again. Picture Jerusalem in the year 1119, a city steeped in dust and prayer. The Crusader states were nascent, fragile under an uncertain peace. Amidst this tumultuous backdrop, 9 anonymous, unsponsored knights presented a singular request: to reside atop the Temple Mount. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, but chose to settle not near bustling markets or prominent churches, but directly above the ruins of Solomon's temple. This location was rumored to still resonate with a divine presence, or perhaps something even more ancient. They erected no chapel and guarded no roads. Instead, day after day, month after month, they descended into the earth. Historical records from this period are scant, and the silence is profound. Yet, when they finally re-emerged, nearly a decade later, the world had been transformed. They were no longer impoverished or obscure. They had become the most powerful and feared military religious force in Christendom, possessing immeasurable wealth and impenetrable secrets. What transpired beneath that temple? What ancient presence did they disturb or liberate? This is not merely a tale of relics and legends. It is the account of a discovery that might have reshaped the spiritual framework of the Western world, and a cover-up that has persisted for centuries. You commence with a map, not one delineated by borders and capitals, but one etched in memory, myth, and sacred geometry. Jerusalem, that perpetual crucible of belief, endures like an unhealed wound, layered with conquest and consecration. The First Crusade, concluding in 1099, left the city bloodied and vulnerable. The Temple Mount, known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, stood eerily vacant. Once the site of Solomon's legendary temple, then Herod's reconstruction, subsequently a Byzantine ruin, and finally a Muslim sanctuary, this plateau bore the weight of centuries. It was holy, it was dangerous, and for reasons that continue to perplex historians, it was where the Templars chose to excavate. They could have established residence anywhere within the newly reclaimed Latin kingdom. Yet, these 9 knights requested a very specific location from King Baldwin II, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. To modern observers, it might appear to be just another repurposed structure. However, to them, and to anyone with a discerning eye for the past, it was the resting place of Solomon's temple, a structure foundational not only to Jewish and Christian identity, but also rumored to be the last known repository of divine instruments. Why choose this location? Why excavate beneath a mosque when the roads were still strewn with the remains of pilgrims? Some contend it was a strategic decision, given that the Temple Mount commanded key roads and offered a military advantage. Others claim it was symbolic, a gesture asserting a Judeo-Christian legacy in a city of divergent truths. However, a more subdued theory whispers beneath these explanations, one seldom appearing in textbooks. The Templars believed something significant remained beneath the surface. Not mere rubble, nor simple relics, but profound knowledge. Centuries-old Jewish texts had suggested that Solomon constructed more than just a temple. He built an underworld of vaults and channels, some for treasures, others for mysteries far more profound than gold. The Book of Kings speaks of hidden rooms and secret foundations. Rabbinic lore delves even deeper, describing chambers where the Ark was concealed and sacred fire was hidden from Babylonian invaders. It was not merely a building, it was a labyrinth. Therefore, when the Templars descended into those ruins, they were not solely seeking history. They pursued something whispered to them by the ancient custodians of the Holy Land keepers of the past, who had survived every purge by retreating into silence. One can almost visualize veiled conversations, knowledge passed through hands hardened by both warfare and scripture. A suggestion, perhaps, that the answers to their profound questions lay not in Rome but directly beneath their feet. A century later, the chronicler William of Tyre would record that the knights performed excavations in the temple. This phrase is simple and unremarkable, yet it appears in no other military account. There is no mention of sieges or skirmishes, only silent digging, no record of what was removed, and no given reason. When the Templars finally re-emerged into daylight after years of subterranean labor, they did not inform local bishops. Instead, they traveled directly to Europe, seeking Bernard of Clairvaux, the most influential voice in the church. Within months, the order was transformed. They were granted autonomy, wealth flowed in, and lands were bestowed upon them. Most tellingly, their number had expanded beyond the original 9. This raises a rather pertinent question. If they had found nothing, why the sudden dramatic shift? Why the meteoric rise? And why would popes begin issuing edicts, placing them above secular law, exempting them from taxes, and granting them immunity from local authority? It is almost as if they had offered the church something of immense value, or perhaps something sufficiently dangerous to warrant control rather than outright suppression. One theory, rarely voiced above a whisper, posits that their discovery threatened Rome more than it blessed it. Not a relic nor a scroll, but an idea, a reinterpretation of sacred origins, a glimpse into pre-biblical history, something that did not belong exclusively to Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, but predated them all. Even today, archaeologists approach the Temple Mount with extreme caution, not only due to political tensions, but because the ground itself resists interpretation. Ground-penetrating radar is restricted, and excavation permits are virtually impossible to obtain. No entity, not even the Israeli Antiquities Authority, undertakes digging there without risking diplomatic catastrophe. Why? Because beneath the Temple Mount lies a mystery that no one truly wishes to resolve. Perhaps that is the precise intention. Perhaps the Templars uncovered something so disruptive, so cosmologically inconvenient, that the only way to preserve civilization's fragile myths was to keep it perpetually buried. Yet, one cannot help but wonder, why did they return day after day for such an extended period, slipping into the earth like specters? What did they witness in the darkness? And what profound silence was exchanged for their protection? You recall that initial image, the map without borders. It does not depict roads. It illustrates fault lines, the places where belief trembles, where ancient deities murmur in their slumber. And there, at the very core of it all, is a solitary hilltop in Jerusalem, and the excavation that altered history. They profess poverty as their emblem, 9 knights with no banner but faith, no wealth but conviction, and no ostensible reason to be taken seriously. Yet for nearly a decade, these men remained rooted in place, without expanding their ranks, without recruiting, and most remarkably, without engaging in combat. In a land where sword met steel with daily regularity, their absence from the battlefield perplexed even their contemporaries. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ arrived with noble intentions, or so the narrative suggests. However, what they genuinely occupied themselves with beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque remains an enigma that clings to history like incense in a crypt. From 1119 to approximately 1128, this core group of 9 knights lived an almost monastic existence atop the Temple Mount. Records of military engagement during this period are virtually non-existent. There are no victories to extol, no casualties to lament, merely an unsettling stillness, as if time had paused around them while the rest of the Crusader world surged forward. Throughout this period, they resisted expansion, choosing to do so only after they had discovered something. It is tempting to interpret this period as a spiritual sabbatical, a quiet devotion to God and Jerusalem. However, if that were the case, why the intense secrecy? Why the silence in documentation? The chroniclers of that era were far from subtle. They meticulously recorded the size of fish caught near Tyre and cataloged the dreams of Crusader generals. Yet for nearly a decade, the Templars seemed to vanish into the background, leaving only the faintest whispers of their daily lives. This signifies not merely piety, but deliberate concealment. One particularly obscure letter from the abbot of Clairvaux, often overlooked by mainstream historians, alludes to an undertaking of significant depth and discipline occurring in Jerusalem during this time. Most interpret this as a metaphor for spiritual growth. But what if it was not? What if it referred to something literal, digging, exploring, uncovering? The Templars, after all, were not just warriors. Many originated from noble families, possessing education, linguistic skills, and access to ancient manuscripts. Some were adept in engineering, mathematics, and sacred geometry. To dismiss them as simple knights would be akin to calling Da Vinci a mere doodler. They possessed the means to plan and execute a sustained excavation operation, and they held the key location. The Temple Mount was not merely symbolic, it was geological. Its foundations were rumored to contain chambers, tunnels, and passages from the first and second temples, some natural, some carved by hands long turned to dust. Intriguingly, during the same period, various relics and manuscripts quietly began appearing in certain European monasteries, items of Jewish origin, often written in Aramaic or an unidentified script. While none were officially linked to the Templars, the timing was highly suspicious. It was as if strands of forgotten knowledge were being disseminated covertly, leaving no discernible fingerprints, yet unsettling many. Certain bishops even issued warnings against the unauthorized copying or circulation of sacred texts. One such document, discovered centuries later in the Vatican archives, contained a direct reference to scrolls of the Solomonic halls. Still, not everything was so subtle. In the subsequent decades, Templar commanderies began to incorporate curious architectural elements, spirals, twin pillars, and geometries that emulated not the Latin cross, but the layout of Solomon's temple. This design divergence puzzled later scholars. Why deviate from the classic cruciform style unless the influence stemmed not from Rome but from something unearthed in those dark Jerusalem vaults? Some accounts claim the Templars discovered early Kabbalistic texts, or at least proto-Kabbalistic writings, that predated the formalized tradition by centuries. These documents, if authentic, would have introduced a radically different cosmology, one that depicted God not as a distant monarch in heaven, but as a radiant unfolding of emanations, light, numbers, patterns, a divine presence embedded in architecture, proportion, and vibration. Such concepts would have appeared heretical, if not incomprehensible, to the Latin Church. But to the Templars, perhaps it was a revelation worth safeguarding. It is also important to observe what changed after those 9 years. Once they emerged, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, they were granted privileges no other order enjoyed: immunity from local laws, tax exemptions, and direct access to the Pope. Their numbers grew exponentially, their coffers swelled with land and gold, and their influence extended across borders like ivy on a crypt wall. Coincidence? Or was this the reward for presenting something the Church desired to keep concealed? A peculiar gap persists in the records from the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, roughly from 1122 to 1127. A fire is often cited as the reason for the missing scrolls. Fires do occur, but this one, it seems, targeted only one vault, only one set of records, and the individual responsible for its safekeeping was later reassigned to a minor parish in the Italian countryside, never to be heard from again. One cannot help but be suspicious. More remarkably, the earliest accounts of Templar rituals date not from this formative period, but from much later, secondhand reports speculative and often penned by their adversaries. What rituals did they practice during those 9 hidden years? What vows were exchanged beneath Jerusalem, far from the scrutiny of Rome? Then there is the dream, the strange but persistent dream, recorded by a 13th century monk from Burgundy, who claimed a dying knight confessed to visions of a throne of light guarded by lions and etched with stars. Whether a hallucination or a memory, the imagery echoed certain apocalyptic Jewish texts that had not yet been translated into Latin. How would a French knight have known such details? Thus, centuries later, we peer through a haze of gaps and redactions. The 9 knights who arrived, impoverished and anonymous, departed as something entirely different, not merely warriors, not simply monks, but custodians of something more ancient than either title could encompass. And the excavation they undertook beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque was never refilled. It still exists, sealed, guarded, unnamed, yet not forgotten. You have likely encountered the romanticized portrayals. White-cloaked knights riding through sunlit ruins, swords gleaming, faith unwavering. However, the most enduring legacy of the Templars may not reside in their military engagements or vast financial holdings. It may lie in lines, geometry, and diagrams, subtle evidence etched into vellum and concealed in the margins of history. While their contemporaries constructed with brick and mortar, the Templars seemed to build in secrecy and silence, fashioning an invisible map of something they dared not articulate. The true blueprint of their power may have originated underground, beneath Solomon's temple. During the early 14th century, a peculiar scroll came into the possession of a minor French nobleman. Unadorned, written in a mix of Latin shorthand and geometric symbols, the parchment offered no direct explanation, only measurements, cryptic annotations, and the unmistakable outline of a structure featuring 7 chambers descending in depth and complexity. The dimensions were not based on Roman standards, but on an older scale, likely Egyptian or Mesopotamian in origin. This scroll, now lost, was initially dismissed as fantasy, until researchers decades later noted that its proportions precisely matched the foundations of the Temple Mount. The implications were startling and profoundly unsettling. If the scroll had indeed originated from Templar hands, as its provenance suggested, it implied the Knights had either discovered ancient architectural plans beneath the temple or had drafted them firsthand during their years of subterranean exploration. Neither possibility aligns with the neat, sanitized narrative presented by medieval church chroniclers. Yet, similar diagrams began to emerge elsewhere, often buried within unrelated monastic texts. A manuscript from Toledo contained an uncredited fold-out page that appeared to mirror the same subterranean network, including notations in a hybrid of Hebrew and medieval French. One chamber was labeled MZL, possibly a variation of Mazel, the Hebrew word for destiny or constellation. One could argue this is mere coincidence, perhaps medieval doodling, or the result of overworked scribes. However, the recurring presence of these diagrams, dispersed across European libraries, suggests coordination, a blueprint intended for preservation not in one location, but in fragments, hidden in plain sight, like a deliberately shattered mosaic, designed to be impossible to fully erase. Architectural anomalies also speak volumes. At the Templar Chapel in Tomar, Portugal, one of the order's most sacred sites, the floor plan deviates from standard church design. It features an octagonal rotunda, mirroring the dome of the rock. But its significance is not merely symbolic. Concealed beneath the chapel is a circular chamber, accessible only via a narrow spiral staircase. Historians have long debated its function, a ritual chamber, a storage vault. What is rarely discussed is how its proportions align almost perfectly with the third chamber depicted in the mysterious scroll. This pattern is replicated across Europe in churches, crypts, and towers attributed to the Templars, each slightly different yet echoing the same geometrical logic, the same invisible architecture, and it was not limited to buildings. In 1929, a French archaeologist working near the Rhône River unearthed a peculiar stone disc buried next to a collapsed granary. The disc, though weathered, bore concentric circles divided into unequal segments. Initial assessments dismissed it as agricultural, perhaps a crop calendar, but when measured, the ratios matched those found in the so-called Solomonic diagrams of the Templar manuscripts. Even stranger, etched near the center, was a symbol that defied attribution, a star within a hexagon surrounded by waves. Some regarded it as esoteric nonsense. Others whispered a more disquieting possibility, that it represented a chamber beneath Jerusalem, one perhaps filled not with gold, but with echoes. A recurring motif in these maps is the pair of pillars, Boaz and Jachin, said to have stood at the entrance of Solomon's temple. They reappear repeatedly, sketched beside doorways, carved into archways, and woven into Templar tapestries. However, in these renderings, the pillars are not merely decorative, they are directional compass points, anchors in an otherwise shifting design. If the Templars followed a map, these pillars may have served as their Rosetta Stone. And then there is the question few are eager to ask: who assisted them in deciphering it? The Templars were not the first to explore the Temple Mount. Before them came Jewish mystics, Byzantine engineers, and Islamic scholars, each leaving behind fragments of knowledge, oral traditions, and guarded secrets. Some believe the Templars formed quiet alliances with local families descendants of Levites or scholars who had preserved knowledge forbidden in both synagogue and mosque. Whispers of these collaborations surface in obscure oral histories, such as the tale of Yusuf al-Muqaddasi, a Sufi ascetic who reportedly met with a Frankish knight and gave him a sealed scroll wrapped in linen, cautioning that the path below is not made of stone but of time. Of course, mainstream historians dismiss these claims. There is no formal record, no signature on parchment, but that is precisely the point. The Templars left behind blueprints not for buildings, but for a worldview, a network of knowledge encoded in geometry, hidden in architecture, and transmitted through silence. Even today, when modern archaeologists conduct surveys near the Temple Mount, anomalies persist. Ground-penetrating radar reveals cavities where none should exist, corridors leading nowhere, chambers that vanish into the bedrock. However, full excavation is forbidden. Politics, religion, and fear conspire to keep the soil undisturbed. It is as if the earth itself has been sworn to secrecy. And one is left to wonder, were the Templars the last to witness that hidden space beneath the stones where light never penetrates and time folds in on itself? Did they crawl through dust and echoes with trembling hands, mapping something no human was ever meant to comprehend? Or did they simply awaken something that had been waiting? One diagram, reportedly found in a Sicilian abbey, contains only 5 words in Latin. Non clavis sed lumen intrat, not the key, but the light enters. That is not merely architecture, that is theology. Or perhaps both. It was not crafted from parchment, papyrus, or hide. There was no illuminated lettering, no sacred calligraphy. It was merely a long, battered sheet of copper, crudely etched with names and numbers, resembling a shopping list from the underworld. Discovered in 1,952 inches, Cave 3 of Qumran, near the Dead Sea. The copper scroll is one of the most peculiar artifacts associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls. While its counterparts are theological and poetic, this one reads like a ledger, but not for coins or livestock. It details treasure. It speaks in riddles of massive quantities of gold and silver, temple vessels, and scrolls buried beneath the third step, under the ruins, or in the cavity of the pillar, specific yet maddeningly vague. Nowhere does it name a single person or event, only locations that may no longer exist, or perhaps never did. To most scholars, the Copper Scroll is a curious puzzle, attributed to the Essenes or other apocalyptic sects of the Second Temple period. However, for those seeking the deeper shadows of history, particularly the Knights Templar, it may have been a map, not to riches, but to proof. Proof that the Temple of Solomon concealed more than mere relics, that it had hidden ideas. And these ideas were safeguarded in places the Romans could not burn and the priests could not confess. The Templars' alleged contact with local communities, Jewish, Arabic, and Samaritan, might have exposed them to surviving oral traditions. Some suggest they encountered a lineage of desert mystics who spoke of a scroll not kept in a temple but on the temple. One legend, collected by 19th century travelers, described a bronze leaf that bleeds numbers, taken from beneath a rock where stars used to gather. Naturally, mainstream academics scoff at such tales, and yet, it is noteworthy that the Templars, after their prolonged silence in Jerusalem, began acquiring land suspiciously close to Qumran. A transaction in 1131, recorded in the archives of Acre, shows a grant to the order for an unremarkable stretch of dry basin, neither strategically important nor agriculturally valuable. What it was, however, was within walking distance of Cave 3, a detail conveniently overlooked in most military histories. What if they possessed it? Not the literal copper scroll we have today, but an earlier version, perhaps the same text etched in a different medium, passed down through centuries. Could that have been their discovery beneath the Temple Mount? Not treasure itself, but the directions to treasure, not coins or relics, but coordinates to something buried deeper than any vault and more perilous than any sword. The irony, of course, is that the modern copper scroll is almost impossible to decipher. Its syntax is clumsy, its grammar fractured, and some locations contradict others. But therein lies its brilliance. If it was encoded for secrecy, then nonsense was the perfect armor. Perhaps only those with the original key could interpret it, a map without a compass. What renders the theory more compelling is how the Templars subsequently behaved. In France, Spain, and Portugal, they commenced constructing buildings with underground chambers that mirrored the measurements described in the scroll. A chamber north of the double column, a vault behind the fourth step. At the Templar stronghold of Ponferrada in Spain, an underground crypt features an irregular recess hidden behind a stone altar, its location aligning precisely with one of the described treasure vaults. Coincidence or reconstruction? One passage of the scroll mentions a hidden library, 42 scrolls stored in a cedar box beneath the ruins of the valley. Modern searches have yielded nothing. However, Templar ships were not built for naught. If they followed this map, whether literal or symbolic, it is not difficult to imagine that the most valuable artifacts were quietly relocated across seas, beneath monasteries, or even into cathedrals we now consider purely architectural marvels. It is not solely about gold, it is about what the gold guarded. Some theorists, admittedly on the fringe, suggest the Templars interpreted the Copper Scroll as an encoded spiritual text. Its numbers and measures serve dual purposes. On the surface, treasure; beneath, a key to cosmological truth. Patterns within the scroll appear to follow the same number sequences found in Kabbalistic systems and, curiously, in medieval Christian alchemy, a convergence of traditions separated by time and theology, except in the hands of those who knew where to look. And yet, despite these tantalizing overlaps, no one has definitively linked the Templars to the Copper Scroll. That is, until the partial resurfacing of a 13th century Latin manuscript in the Biblioteca Nacional in Madrid. Written by an anonymous monk, the document makes passing reference to a map made of metal whose numbers speak in thunder. Thunder, the same metaphor used by Jewish mystics to describe revelations at Sinai. Coincidence again, perhaps. Or perhaps history consistently encounters the same buried wire. One final note, merely for curiosity. The Copper Scroll ends abruptly. No final tally, no closing statement. Just one last location written halfway down the plate, and then silence, as if the writer was interrupted or chose to cease. As if the final location was too dangerous to record or too sacred to share. So now you know. Beneath the legends of Solomon's gold and Herod's marble, there is another layer, one not gilded in wealth, but etched in copper, a riddle composed of weight and silence. And it is quite possible that the men in white cloaks discovered it, or something similar, and followed it to the furthest reaches of the known world. If that is true, then the true treasure has never been in Jerusalem. It is the sensational headline, is it not? The Ark of the Covenant. This very object has captivated imaginations for centuries, shimmering in films, whispered about in sermons, and sketched on crumbling pages of half-translated manuscripts. The vessel is said to contain the original tablets of Moses, the voice of God in a box, or a weapon, or a throne, or a myth, depending on whom you ask. If the Templars discovered anything beneath the Temple Mount, conventional thought immediately turns to the Ark. It is a straightforward narrative, satisfying, visually compelling, and dramatic. However, you have journeyed this far to understand that what is satisfying is rarely what is true. In this particular instance, the golden box may have served not as the ultimate prize, but as the perfect distraction. Let us begin with what the Ark was believed to be. According to the Hebrew Bible, it was constructed under divine instruction and placed within the inner sanctum of Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies. It was guarded, veiled, and never to be touched. When Israel fell, it vanished. Theories abound. Some claim it was hidden before the Babylonians breached the walls. Others assert it was taken to Ethiopia. Some whisper it was buried beneath the temple itself, precisely where the Templars would later excavate. And yet, no record, no physical trace, only persistent echoes. What is peculiar is how rapidly the Ark became associated with the Templars. Medieval chroniclers, particularly those outside the order, began linking them to divine artifacts and unseen powers shortly after their rise to prominence. There were even claims, bordering on hysterical, that they wielded relics too dangerous to display, items capable of summoning storms or shattering armies. Clearly hyperbole, but beneath the exaggeration, something significant was stirring. One of the earliest connections appears in a text by Otto of Freising, who writes of a company of knights who claimed to guard the thunder of Sinai. The phrasing is curious thunder, not tablets. It evokes sound, power, resonance. Later interpretations embellished this into a theory that the Templars had uncovered the Ark, or at least portions of it, and stored it in secret. Some suggested it traveled with their convoys across Europe. Others claimed it remained buried beneath their commandery in Acre. However, no tangible proof ever surfaced. Unless, of course, that was the entire purpose. You see, the more one examines the evidence, the more the Ark begins to resemble a red herring, a useful myth that draws attention while something else, quieter, less cinematic, slips through the cracks. The Templars, master strategists that they were, may have intentionally allowed the Ark story to flourish. After all, what better way to conceal a profound discovery than to enshroud it in a legend so implausible that it would be dismissed outright? Consider this. During the 13th century, a series of churches were constructed with peculiar tabernacle niches, large, elaborately framed spaces with no obvious liturgical function. Some were entirely sealed. At Chartres Cathedral, the southern crypt contains a chamber once believed to hold the Ark itself, though no credible evidence supports this theory. Still, why construct a shrine to something you do not possess? Perhaps they did not possess the Ark. Perhaps they held something far more dangerous: texts, not sacred relics but forbidden knowledge. And the Ark myth served as the perfect decoy, grand enough to ignite curiosity, yet mythical enough to remain unverifiable. This would not be the first time a powerful institution utilized symbolism as camouflage. In fact, Jewish mysticism long maintained that the Ark's true value lay not in its contents, but in its construction. Its measurements, proportions, and materials were believed to encode spiritual truths. Kabbalistic texts suggested that the Ark was not merely a container but a cipher, a map of the divine structure of the cosmos. If the Templars discovered even fragments of such writings, the implications would be enormous, not merely religious, but mathematical, architectural, and even cosmological. Which brings us to the greatest irony of all. The real Ark may never have been a physical box. It may have been an idea, one so explosive that the Church would prefer a golden chest adorned with cherubs over a paradigm shift in theology, and the Templars perhaps understood that. Perhaps they allowed the Ark legend to flourish, because it enabled them to clandestinely transport something even greater under its protective shadow. During their arrests in 1307, inquisitors were obsessed with locating relics. The Ark was never explicitly mentioned. However, hidden treasures, strange idols, and secret texts were. The documents are clear on one point. The Church was not merely seeking wealth, it was seeking answers. Answers it believed the Templars had no right to possess. One inquisitor's notes mention a knight referencing the throne of silence wrapped in no gold but fire. It sounds poetic, perhaps delusional, but there it is again, that shift from object to essence, from treasure to truth. Even in Ethiopia, where the Ark is said to reside within the Church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion, no outsider has ever seen it. The guardian priests are forbidden to speak of it. There are no photographs, no verification, only stories. So perhaps that is the genius of the myth. Perhaps the Ark was never intended to be found. Because while the world chases gold and thunder, the true secret slips past, encoded in stone and number, in quiet revolution. And the Templars, they never denied finding it, but they never confirmed it either. They simply vanished into history, trailing their silence behind them like a cloak. You can almost visualize the dust swirling as they lifted the lid. Not gold, not jewels, but parchment brittle, ancient, inked with characters that no Templar training would have prepared them to read. Yet there it was, a truth too delicate for sunlight, but too potent to ignore. What if the true treasure beneath the temple was not a relic at all, but scripture? Not the kind approved by councils and popes, but scrolls from a time when faith was not yet formalized, when the voice of the divine had not been neatly divided into testaments and translations. This is not mere speculation. There are whispers, fragments of accounts, apocryphal notes in monastic margins, and intercepted letters that suggest the Templars brought back texts. Not one, not a single volume, but a cache, perhaps even a library. Some of the earliest mentions come from Islamic scholars in the Levant who, during the 12th century, remarked that the Franks searched not for gold but for writings of the sons of Harun, Aaron, brother of Moses. A curious observation, especially when considering the Qumran region's long history of document preservation. The Essenes, a sect known for obsessive archiving, may have hidden dozens of texts before the Roman siege. Some believe that similar caches existed beneath the Temple Mount, sealed away in stone niches, untouched since the days of Herod. If the Templars discovered these writings, the implications are staggering. What they uncovered would have predated the New Testament. In fact, it may have predated the Torah in its current form, early Proto-Hebrew texts, perhaps mixed with Zoroastrian, Babylonian, or even Egyptian theological elements. A primordial theology, unrefined, unapproved, unfiltered, and, more than that, dangerous, because the moment you hold a scroll that contradicts the official narrative, you become a liability. Knowledge, especially ancient knowledge, has a tendency to destabilize power. Imagine a document describing the temple's original purpose, not as a house of God, but as a cosmic engine, a place where ritual aligned with the stars to channel divine force. Now imagine reading that while wearing a cross on your chest and answering to a pope who believes heaven is only accessible through a sacrament. One Templar seal, found near Languedoc, depicts two knights on one horse, an emblem often interpreted as a symbol of poverty or brotherhood. However, some suggest another meaning: duality, two truths sharing the same mount, the known and the forbidden, the visible and the veiled. This theory finds strange support in their architectural choices. Templar chapels often contain unusual inscriptions, Latin words arranged in ways that make no grammatical sense, phrases that echo fragments found in the Book of Enoch or the Sefer Yetzirah, two texts long considered heretical by church authorities. Why include them unless they had access to versions of these writings long before they re-entered Western awareness through Jewish scholars or Renaissance collectors? And then there are the confessions. During the brutal inquisitions of 1307, some captured Templars mentioned the writings of the Old Law and parchments that speak of the stars. These statements, buried in trial records, were often redacted or dismissed, too vague, too inconvenient. But they exist hints that what the church feared most was not a devil idol or a secret initiation rite. It was a different version of scripture, one that did not require their permission to be believed. There is also the troubling letter preserved in the Vatican's Archivo Segreto, written by a Cistercian monk in 1242. He warns of manuscripts with no father, describing texts written in a hand that mimicked Hebrew, but sang in tongues that did not belong to this age. He claims they were being translated by Knights of the East, and that one bore a passage suggesting the Creator did not make man from dust, but from light. You begin to comprehend why the Templars became dangerous, not because they wielded weapons, but because they held alternatives. And the nature of alternatives is that they demand choice. They shatter the illusion that there is only one path, one truth, one permissible lineage through the divine. This would explain their peculiar relationship with the Church. On the surface, loyal, pious, deferential, but beneath, perhaps a quiet rebellion, a parallel theology conveyed not in sermons, but in silence, smuggled across continents in saddlebags, hidden in vaults beneath chapels, read only by torchlight, preserved not with ink, but with oath. One story, almost entirely forgotten, recounts a Templar knight stationed in Antioch who was accused of blasphemy not for speech, but for possession. A scroll, charred at the edges, written in letters shaped like flames. He refused to surrender it. His last recorded words were, "It does not belong to you, it belongs to the beginning." The beginning. That is what this all points toward. A moment before doctrine, before division, before the divine was monopolized by institution. A wild theology still pulsating in the soil beneath Jerusalem. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is what the Templars found. Not the Ark, not gold, but the raw script of creation. A theology so ancient, it renders all others mere footnotes, and in their hands, it transformed into something else, a secret not of stone, but of story, one they could never speak aloud, one they could only guard and pass on, one torchbearer at a time. A scroll is not necessary when one possesses stone. Long after languages are silenced and manuscripts are incinerated, architecture speaks softly, patiently. Its idiom is one of shadow and light, of ratios and rhythms, of truths concealed in plain sight. Across Europe, in cathedrals where no bishop ever dictated the design, the legacy of the Templars murmurs through angles and arches. If they returned from Jerusalem bearing a secret, they did not confine it to vaults. They built it into walls. Consider the Gothic cathedrals that soared like divine forests from the 12th century onward. Chartres, Notre Dame, Roslin. These structures, impossibly complex, appear anachronistic, as if transported from a future where sacred geometry was instinctive. Their proportions align with astronomical events. Their windows radiate not merely with color, but with encoded symbolism. Their labyrinths mirror constellations, and their foundations were often laid with the assistance, or under the direct patronage of the Templars. Chartres Cathedral, for instance, occupies a site once sacred to the Druids, layered subsequently with Roman masonry and then medieval vision. Beneath its nave lies a crypt, vast and echoing, aligned with magnetic north. The Black Madonna enshrined within is not, in its origin, a Christian figure at all. She predates the church's iconography. She is a goddess veiled in Mary's robes, and nearby, carved discreetly into a pillar, is an image of two interlocking triangles, a six-pointed star, Solomon's seal. Coincidence is a convenient term, but by now, one begins to sense its unlikelihood. At Roslin Chapel in Scotland, Templar influence is undisputed. The Sinclair family, bound by blood and oath to the order, filled the space with a profusion of stone carvings, angels holding musical instruments that matched the frequencies of sacred hymns, strange green men peering from the cornices, and pillars etched with symbols that correspond to Kabbalistic trees and Masonic diagrams. One ceiling panel, arranged in a spiral of cubes, mirrors the dimensions of the so-called inner chamber described in Solomonic texts. At the heart of the chapel stands the apprentice pillar, twisted like a strand of DNA, crowned with lotus motifs that have no place in Christian art unless, of course, one believes they transported more than stone from Jerusalem. Templar churches frequently adopted the circular floor plan, a style previously unheard of in Latin architecture. Whence did it originate? The Dome of the Rock, the very structure they used as their base in Jerusalem, believed to sit atop the ruins of the temple itself. The circle, a symbol of infinity, of the divine with no beginning or end, became the blueprint, a quiet rebellion against the rigid cruciform of traditional Christendom. It was a declaration. We have seen the original, and this is closer. This pattern recurs across France, Portugal, and England. Round chapels, secret chambers, twin pillars, symbols that predate the New Testament, etched alongside Christian crosses. It is as if they were endeavoring to impart knowledge without speaking, to encode what could not be articulated. They were not merely masons, they were translators of something older than Rome, older than Christ. One theory, dismissed by academia but embraced by esoteric historians, posits that the Templars were custodians of an architectural language inherited from ancient Egypt, filtered through Hebrew mysticism, and rediscovered in the vaults beneath the Temple Mount. The cubit, the golden ratio, the vesica piscis, all present not merely as mathematical flourishes, but as messages. Each column's height, each window's angle, each choir's curve, all part of a language where the sacred is measured, not merely felt. And yet, they never boasted. They never published treatises or composed scrolls explaining their craft. Perhaps they understood that sacred truths are not explained, they are experienced. One navigates the labyrinth, one senses the resonance. There is no need to be told its meaning, the very bones already comprehend. There is an old story, whispered among stonecutters in northern Spain, that during the construction of a small rural chapel in 1243, a group of silent foreigners arrived. They did not speak the local language and brought no tools. Yet, within days, the workers were following a new plan, one involving columns that matched celestial coordinates and stones that had to be laid at night under a specific moon phase. When the work was completed, the strangers departed without payment. Only a single mark remained on the doorframe, a compass wrapped in flame. Skeptical, naturally. But then again, that same chapel, Leda de San Bartolome, sits on a geomagnetic node. Pilgrims who sleep there report vivid dreams. Some hear music where none plays. The builders knew something, or perhaps they remembered. Even today, modern architects studying Templar-era structures discover measurements that defy the tools available at the time, angles cut with absurd precision, load-bearing feats that should have resulted in collapse. It is as if the blueprints originated from elsewhere, somewhere older, and all of it echoing Solomon. One begins to wonder, perhaps they did not need to transport scrolls or relics home. Perhaps they carried patterns, sacred proportions, divine alignments, the DNA of a temple that was never solely physical, and by embedding it into the cathedrals of Europe, they ensured the secret would endure even if the order was destroyed. They built not just with stone, but with silence, with memory, with code. And perhaps even now, traversing those cold vaulted halls, you can perceive it, the echo of the temple beneath your feet. A rhythm, a ratio, a whisper between the stones. Some secrets scream for attention, others repose quietly in the darkness, content to await discovery. However, the most perilous ones, the truly transformative, bear a distinct weight. They are not concealed by force, they are hidden by choice. Not because no one can find them, but because those who do choose silence. In the narrative of the Knights Templar, this silence reverberates more profoundly than any relic, any scroll, any battle. For when the order was finally brought to its knees, no one, not even under torture, ever revealed what had truly been discovered. One might anticipate confessions, a final whisper, a deathbed admission. Yet, across hundreds of arrests, interrogations, and executions, there is no consistent revelation, no relic presented, no scroll unveiled, only scattered accusations, contradictions, and an eerie void at the core. It is as if they had all implicitly, eternally agreed, speak of anything but not that. And perhaps that is what most alarmed the Church. Not what the Templars uttered, but what they steadfastly refused to articulate. There is a moment buried in the transcripts of the Paris Inquisitions where a Templar named Jean de Joinville is pressed to identify the idol allegedly worshipped by the order. He provides no name, no shape, only this: what we were shown was not meant for tongues, only for hearts, only for silence. A cryptic response, certainly, but hauntingly consistent with others. Several knights referenced a presence or light encountered in secrecy, described not as an object, but as an experience, something that entered rather than appeared, vague, insubstantial, yet persistent. And then there is Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, standing on a scaffold in 1314 with flames licking at the wood beneath him. He could have pleaded, bargained, or revealed some astonishing artifact. Instead, he simply proclaimed his innocence and invited the Pope and King to join him in divine judgment. Within a year, both were deceased. Coincidence, or the slow turning of an ancient curse? Ah, yes, the curse. Romantic, indeed. Overused, definitely. But consider this. After the arrests, several chroniclers began recording unexplained deaths, failed crops, and freak storms in regions where Templar commanderies had been established. In Yorkshire, a shepherd discovered a limestone tablet half buried near a former preceptory. Etched only with the words, "You have broken the seal," the bishop declared it a fraud. The shepherd was later found face down in a stream, his hands folded over his mouth, perhaps more symbolic than sinister. However, the Templars themselves seemed to believe they were bound by something deeper than vows. One obscure rule of the order, preserved only in a Castilian copy, refers to the consecrated silence of the ninth vault. It does not explain what the ninth vault is, but the phrase appears again in architectural notes from the Templar commandery in Tomar, Portugal, a chamber labeled with 9 concentric circles sealed behind a false wall. It was opened in 1892 and found completely empty. Not a scrap, not a nail, just smooth stone, cold as judgment. Some speculate that this silence was more than strategy, that the Templars believed speaking the truth of what they found would release something, some knowledge, some force not meant for the world. Or perhaps it was simpler. Perhaps they knew no one would believe them, and so they held it close until the silence became an intrinsic part of their ritual. Even modern esoteric traditions carry echoes of this vow. Freemasons speak of the great work, never to be uttered aloud. Sufi mystics speak of Marifa, a truth so profound it cannot be written. And Kabbalists speak of the Ein Sof, the infinite known only through negation, never affirmation, a silence that is not absence, but totality. So what did the Templars choose not to disclose? Some suggest it was not a relic, or a scroll, or even a theology. It was a realization that the divine was not confined to a temple or a book, that it was pattern, light, resonance, the same truth etched in the layout of stars and the spiral of a seashell, a secret that could not be articulated because it was already known by every heart that had ever wondered and every mind that had ever listened for more. It is fitting, then, that so much of the Templar myth is constructed not on what was revealed, but on what remains hidden. No inventory, no recovery, only silence, a silence that grows heavier with time. One Templar tomb in Provence bears no name, no cross, only an inscription in Latin. Tacita loquitur, the silent one speaks. And perhaps it still does, in the stone that does not crumble, in the chamber that remains sealed, in the absence that vibrates louder than sound. Because ultimately, silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a choice, a guardrail, a boundary between what should be known and what should be endured. And the Templars, they chose silence, not out of fear, but perhaps out of mercy. It was dawn, of course. That is how these events typically unfold, with parchment and seals, with soldiers and suspicion. On October 13th, 1307, Friday, the 13th, the Order of the Knights Templar was eradicated with astonishing efficiency. Across France, Templar commanderies were raided. Men in white cloaks were shackled, dragged from their beds, and cast into cells that reeked of rust and dread. The charges were heresy, idolatry, and blasphemy, the standard concoction when one intends to neutralize a threat but lacks conclusive evidence. Yet, embedded within the transcripts of those interrogations, beneath the forced confessions and recycled accusations, lies a strange undercurrent. a fear not of what the Templars did, but of what they possessed in terms of knowledge. Initially, the trial appeared to be theatrical. King Philip IV of France, financially distressed and politically cornered, required a target. The wealthy and autonomous Templars perfectly fit the description. The papacy, weakened by Philip's influence, granted reluctant approval, thus initiating a campaign of judicial destruction veiled in holy rhetoric. However, the questions posed by the inquisitors were not solely about doctrine. They were not concerned with battlefield ethics or financial impropriety. They consistently circled something more elusive: rituals conducted in secret, names not found in scripture, and knowledge that did not originate from Rome. Many of the accusations resonate with anyone familiar with medieval paranoia: that the Templars spat on the cross, denied Christ, and worshipped a mysterious head. But beneath the hysteria lies an unsettling pattern. The Inquisition seemed fixated on the initiation rites, especially what occurred in the inner chambers, shielded from public view. They demanded specific details of whispered oaths, of symbols revealed only once, of strange lights observed during ceremonies. In multiple testimonies, the interrogators specifically inquired whether the Templars had read anything forbidden, whether scrolls were present, and whether they had received teachings not sanctioned by the Church. One knight, under torture, confessed that new recruits were shown a writing that was not Latin nor Greek nor Hebrew, but burned like the Sunday. Another, whose name was later excised from the record, claimed he had seen a book without a beginning, filled with names not of men, but of things that move through the sky. Was he hallucinating, or recounting something he once glimpsed and never truly comprehended? Intriguingly, the infamous idol, later popularized as Baphomet, was never described consistently. Some said it had 3 faces, others claimed it was a bearded head. One spoke of a glowing sphere that provided answers. The lack of consistency could suggest fabrication, or it could point to something symbolic, abstract, beyond their capacity to name something experienced rather than seen, something interpreted differently by each man because it was not a physical entity at all, but a revelation. Several historians have highlighted the similarities between these accounts and early Gnostic rituals initiations, where the candidate is shown a living light, hears a secret name, and swears to protect knowledge that would dismantle the structures of humanity. The Catholic Church had long considered Gnosticism a mortal threat, not because it denied God, but because it proposed direct access, direct communion. No priest was needed, no hierarchy, just the individual and the divine, unmediated, unapproved, uncontrolled. Is that what the Templars were safeguarding? One of the most overlooked documents from the trials is the Chinon parchment, discovered in the Vatican archives in 2001. It reveals that Pope Clement V had actually absolved the Templar leadership in secret, acknowledging their strange practices but deeming them not heretical. This shatters the entire narrative. If the Pope did not condemn them, why the executions? Why the obliteration? Because perhaps the real threat was not theological, it was epistemological. Not what the Templars believed, but what they had begun to comprehend. And if they had brought back writings from Jerusalem, texts that rewired cosmology, undermined ecclesiastical authority, or presented a creation story unapproved by Rome, it would explain the Church's urgent silence. Not denial, not correction, but eradication. In Avignon, a scribe working for the papal court wrote a private letter to his brother in 1310. In it, he laments the trials, calling them a blade upon a rope already fraying. He mentions a rumor that the knights had known the name of the first light and built their halls around its echo. What could that possibly signify? A poetic flourish, or an echo of something far older, a name not of a god but of a pattern, a frequency, a law of the universe hidden beneath the symbols of faith. It is also noteworthy that despite the ferocity of the trials, no definitive list of Templar holdings was ever recovered. Their ships vanished. Their archives, if they existed, were never found. It is as if they had prepared for this moment, not out of paranoia, but because they understood that certain truths invariably attract persecution. To carry ancient knowledge is to brand one's soul with a target, and yet, to their last breath, not one of them divulged the core secret. Some begged for forgiveness, some resisted, but no one broke the silence. So the Church burned them, buried the evidence, branded the entire order as heretics, and in doing so, silenced the possibility that something truly extraordinary had been uncovered beneath the temple. Not blasphemy, not sorcery, but an older truth, one that could not be confined by doctrine or displayed in gold, a truth that refused to be spoken. Utter the name Baphomet, and it evokes images of horned demons, inverted pentagrams, and 19th century occult illustrations that resemble something from a rebellious teenager's notebook. However, long before the goat icon of modern pop mythology, there existed something else, something far stranger. During the Templar trials, the term Baphomet repeatedly surfaced in inquisitorial records, yet not once was it described with consistent detail. There were no horns, no hooves, no consensus. This raises a question often overlooked in the drama. Was Baphomet ever a being at all? Or was it a code, an echo of something far older and far more profoundly misunderstood? Let us rewind. The earliest mention of Baphomet in the Templar context appears in confessions extracted under torture during the mass arrests of 1307. Some knights admitted to revering a mysterious head, others referred to a speaking image, and still others to a presence that instructed in silence. The descriptions are maddeningly vague, ranging from a silver idol to a floating head to a bearded man with closed eyes. Some versions claim the head could answer questions, others say it glowed. None agree, which either makes the entire concept an invention or a misinterpretation of something never intended to be literal. The name itself, Baphomet, lacks a clear origin in Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. Some scholars suggest it is a corruption of Muhammad, reflecting medieval Christian prejudice, conflating Islam with heresy. Others propose it is an intentional cipher, possibly encoding the phrase Templi Omnium, Hominum Pacis Abbas, or Father of the Temple of Peace of all men, which would certainly align with the Templars' broader mystic inclinations. And some, of course, believe it was a deliberate distortion, a name given to a force or object whose true title could not, or should not, be spoken aloud. Several occult traditions that emerged centuries later attempted to co-opt Baphomet as a demonic figure, but their representations lack historical grounding. Eliphas Levi's famous drawing of the androgynous, goat-headed deity with wings and a flaming torch between its horns was a 19th century invention, a symbolic fusion of opposing elements, not a recovered Templar image. There is no evidence the Templars ever depicted such a figure, which brings us back to the original trial confessions. One particularly curious record involves a knight named Pierre Dulon, who described Baphomet not as a figure, but as a mirror of black water in which one sees the first truth. It is an unusual phrase, mystical, unhelpful, or perhaps incredibly precise. Mirrors, especially dark or reflective surfaces, have long been associated with divination and altered states. Was Baphomet not an idol, but a device, a tool for vision, a relic designed not to be worshipped, but to be utilized? Another confession refers to Baphomet as a voice from the dust, a line that uncannily mirrors a phrase from Isaiah. Thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as of one that hath a familiar spirit. The Templars were known to have contact with Eastern mystics, Sufis, and scholars who believed that sound, vibration, and language itself could access the divine. Could Baphomet have been a Templar name for something rooted in sound or resonance, a text, a frequency, a ritual? Some speculative historians suggest the term was used to reference a sacred object, possibly an ancient relic recovered during the Temple Mount excavations that transmitted knowledge symbolically, even psychically. Not a demonic figure, but a mnemonic device, a trigger for consciousness, perhaps something aligned with the living light described by initiates. If this sounds far-fetched, recall that to a 14th century inquisitor, steeped in dogma and suspicion, even a compass inscribed with Hebrew letters might appear as witchcraft. The peculiar aspect is how fiercely the Templars protected the name. Even under torture, few provided detailed descriptions. Many denied ever hearing it. Others hesitated, then described something nonsensical, as if reciting from a script or safeguarding a metaphor. And throughout all this, one detail recurs. Baphomet is never framed as evil, never accused of commanding wicked acts. It is described with reverence, curiosity, sometimes even awe, a great secret or sacred head, not a devil to be feared, but a mystery to be preserved. At the Templar commandery in Metz, a stone carving was uncovered in the 1800s. Two faces looking in opposite directions, joined at the crown, one male, one female. No label, no cross, just eyes carved wide and mouths that do not smile. Scholars dismissed it as Romanesque abstraction, but esoteric researchers linked it to Baphomet, not as a person, but as a principle, the union of opposites, the balance of polarities. The hidden knowledge the Templars allegedly recovered may have had less to do with religious objects and more to do with understanding duality, light and shadow, heaven and earth, spirit and flesh. Even the famed idol that the Inquisition sought so desperately was never found, not in any stronghold, crypt, or chapel. Which again begs the question, were they searching for the wrong thing? Perhaps Baphomet was never intended to be possessed. Perhaps it was not a physical entity at all, but a threshold, a concept so alien to the orthodoxy of the time that it could only be described through symbols and feared into legend. And so the name endured, twisted, reimagined, demonized, yet never truly understood. Perhaps that was the ultimate irony, that in their desperate efforts to extract the truth from the Templars, the Inquisitors rendered that truth unknowable. They attacked shadows, burned bodies, scattered symbols, and in doing so, sealed the mystery even deeper. And now, centuries later, all that remains is a word, a whisper, a name carved in fear and silence: Baphomet. Whatever it was, the Templars never relinquished it. It commences with a quiet disappearance. No smoke, no sword, merely records that cease. In the final years preceding the Order's collapse, something began to slip away. Ships unaccounted for, ledgers with gaps, preceptories reporting sudden transfers of goods, horses, chests. Unmarked crates moved for safekeeping. At first glance, these might appear to be administrative adjustments, wartime reshuffling. However, by reading between the lines, by following the silences, one begins to discern a pattern, one suggesting that the Templars anticipated what was coming and were not about to abandon their most cherished secret. The theory, now known as the exile hypothesis, is simple yet unsettling. It posits that the Templars, realizing the net was tightening, smuggled their most significant artifacts, texts, or relics entirely out of Europe. That their treasure, whatever its true nature, was not seized by the French crown. It was moved, dispersed, hidden. The timeline supports this. The arrests commenced in October 1307, but warnings had been circulating since spring. In the months leading up to the crackdown, there was a flurry of unusual activity. In La Rochelle, the Templar port city on the Atlantic, several galleys were loaded under cover of darkness and never seen again. Eyewitnesses claimed the ships sailed west, not south toward the Iberian ports, nor east toward the Holy Land, but west into the open sea. La Rochelle's harbor logs, once meticulously maintained, show several blank entries for that month. No cargo, no passengers, no destinations, just silence. And from that silence, a legend was born, that the Templars fled with their secret, bound not for sanctuary, but for exile. Of course, skeptics dismiss this as romantic speculation, but the oddities accumulate. After the trials, no comprehensive inventory of Templar holdings was ever recovered. Their banking ledgers vanished, their archives gone. If King Philip had hoped to enrich himself with gold, he was sorely disappointed. His prize consisted of paper, stone, and sealed doors. No treasure, no troves, nothing but the ashes of an order and the weight of an unanswered question. Even stranger, some Templar strongholds were found empty, abandoned days before the warrants were issued. It is as if they had been forewarned, or perhaps they simply discerned the signs. And so, like any brotherhood trained in long-term strategy, they activated contingency plans, the kind that require years to prepare, involving secret routes, loyal allies, and silent departures. Where did they go? Some suggest Scotland. At the time, Scotland was excommunicated and hostile to the Pope. The Sinclairs of Rosslyn had long-standing ties to the order. The unfinished Rosslyn Chapel, whose construction began shortly after the trials, features carvings of New World flora such as maize and aloe, long before Columbus embarked on his voyage. Coincidence, artistic invention, or evidence of contact? Others claim the Templars crossed the Atlantic centuries before it became customary. The Norse had already reached Vinland. Templar ships were capable. The Gulf Stream was known, at least to some. One particularly persistent theory posits that the Templars reached Nova Scotia and established a hidden enclave, perhaps even influencing the indigenous Mi'kmaq legends of white crossmen who arrived from the sea bearing strange tools and sacred fire. More grounded historians look to Portugal. There, the Templars were never truly disbanded. Instead, they were reborn under a different name, the Order of Christ, granted sanctuary by King Denis, who refused to abandon them. Within a generation, the Order of Christ was funding exploratory voyages down the African coast, establishing trade routes and expanding cartographic knowledge. It is no coincidence that Prince Henry the Navigator, patron of Portugal's Age of Discovery, was the Grand Master of this very order. His ships bore crosses nearly identical to the Templar sigil. Did the knowledge smuggled out of Jerusalem, scrolls, maps, or perhaps something stranger find its way into these voyages? Were they not merely explorations, but pilgrimages of preservation? One tantalizing clue comes from a 14th century chart known as the Zeno map. It depicts parts of Greenland and Newfoundland with startling accuracy, supposedly based on earlier documents brought by Venetian sailors. Scholars debate its authenticity, but some claim its origins lie with navigators trained by the Order of Christ, men who may have inherited not only ships but also secrets. Even in the Americas, whispers persist. The Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota, bears markings some believe to be medieval Scandinavian and possibly linked to Templar symbology. It is likely a hoax, yes, but like all effective hoaxes, it clings to the edge of something half-remembered, half-true, a shadow of a voyage carved in code. And always beneath these tales is the sense that something had to be moved, that the Templars, having uncovered a truth too incendiary for Rome, made the only logical choice: exile. Not surrender, not destruction, but dispersion. To bury the treasure, not in one place, but in a network, a lattice of hidden sanctuaries waiting not to be found, but to be inherited, a cipher left in stone. A manuscript tucked into a monastery's forbidden shelf, a chant whose rhythm encodes a ratio, a chapel that echoes the chamber beneath Solomon's temple. Not one vault, but many. Not one guardian, but an unbroken line. Perhaps this is why the Templar myth refuses to die, because it was designed to live not as a monument, but as a movement, a migration, a diaspora of knowledge. And if they succeeded, if they smuggled it out before the fires came, then somewhere, in some form, that knowledge still exists, waiting. If you have followed the trail this far, you have likely observed that it does not loop neatly through Europe alone. It spirals outward, southward, into older lands and stranger narratives. Perhaps none are more compelling than those whispered through the highlands of Ethiopia, where a quiet, defiant tradition insists the Ark never departed. Not in chains, not in secret, but with a priestly procession, centuries before the Templars ever set foot in Jerusalem. And there, in the city of Axum, it remains enthroned, not in gold, but in shadow. To comprehend the Ethiopian connection, one must first delve into the Kebra Nagast, a 14th century text compiled from even older oral traditions. According to its account, King Solomon fathered a son with the Queen of Sheba. That son, Menelik I, journeyed to Jerusalem, studied at the temple, and returned to Ethiopia, not empty-handed, but carrying the Ark of the Covenant itself. Whether with or without Solomon's blessing is debated, but the Ark, the tablet, was said to have followed Menelik of its own volition, shadowed by angels. Mythical, certainly, but persistently believed. To this day, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion claims to house the Ark in a sanctuary guarded by a single monk, a guardian chosen for life, forbidden to speak of what he sees. No outsider has entered. There are no photographs, no catalog, merely the word of tradition, unyielding as the stone walls surrounding it. What does this have to do with the Templars? Well, everything, if one believes the clues. Several Templar expeditions into the Horn of Africa are recorded obliquely in maritime documents and diplomatic letters. While most crusading eyes remained fixed on the Holy Land, a smaller number of knights traveled south, following the Red Sea trade routes. Their reasons are unclear. Officially, these voyages were to secure alliances or chart territories, but their destinations, Massawa, Zela, and occasionally inland toward Axum, suggest a different motive. There is also the matter of the Prester John legend, a wildly popular medieval myth that described a powerful Christian king ruling a hidden kingdom beyond the Islamic world. For centuries, Europeans believed Prester John's domain lay in India. Later, attention shifted to Ethiopia. Why? Because it was Christian, ancient, isolated, and replete with churches carved directly into mountains, chapels older than most of Europe's capitals. Among these structures is Lalibela, a complex of rock-hewn churches, primarily constructed between the 12th and 13th centuries, precisely around the time the Templars rose to prominence. Their design is unusual, subterranean, geometrically precise, and riddled with passageways that resemble crypts more than sanctuaries. Local lore claims they were constructed with the aid of angels. More likely, they were built with knowledge. Perhaps from Jerusalem, perhaps from those who had just returned from excavating beneath the Temple Mount. One of the churches, Biete Golgotha, contains statues of robed figures with European features, an anomaly in Ethiopian religious art. Some believe these figures represent the strangers from the north who assisted in the church's construction. Could they have been Templars? The timing aligns, the style aligns, the silence aligns. Even more curious is the symbol etched onto a reliquary in the Axum sanctuary, a cross flanked by twin pillars above a stepped platform. It is unmistakably Templar in form, yet rendered in local stone. Officially, it is dismissed as coincidence, but viewed in context, it becomes part of a larger pattern, a quiet exchange, a hidden alliance. There are even linguistic traces. The Ge'ez word tabo, ark, closely resembles teba, the Hebrew word used in Genesis for Noah's Ark, a container of sacred cargo. In some fringe interpretations, this connection suggests that what the Templars may have been seeking was not a golden chest, but the blueprint of the Ark, a model for containing divine essence. And if the Ethiopian custodians held that knowledge, it would explain why the Templars were drawn there, not to steal, but to study. Several documents from the Portuguese Order of Christ, formed from the ashes of the Templars, mention Eastern rituals preserved in the southern lands, and a tradition that speaks with stars, not syllables. That is not trade talk. That is initiation language. And then there is the silence of Ethiopia itself. For centuries, its church refused to integrate with the Roman or Byzantine branches. It maintained its own calendar, its own rites, its own canon, perhaps not out of pride, but out of protection. If something had been entrusted to them, some relic, some knowledge, it would explain the guardedness, the solemnity. A few brave researchers have attempted to forge academic links. In 1965, a French ethnologist reported seeing scrolls in Axum written in a blend of Aramaic and Syriac, describing rituals for opening the gate of the invisible temple. His findings were dismissed. His notes were later lost. Classic. But the whispers persist that the Templars did not merely take something out of Jerusalem. They followed it south, into a land older than maps, guarded by priests who neither debate nor disclose. And perhaps that is why the Ark has never been definitively located. Not because it was destroyed, not because it never existed, but because it was never a thing to be found. It was a trust passed hand to hand, altar to altar, protected by those who understood that some secrets are not buried. They are carried, lived, guarded not by locks, but by generations of silence. And if the Templars recognized that, then perhaps their truest allegiance was not to Rome or even to Jerusalem. Perhaps it was to Axum. It commences with a symbol, a six-pointed star, simple, symmetrical, ancient. The seal of Solomon, some call it. The Star of David, others say. However, long before it adorned flags or prayer shawls, it existed in secrecy, in alchemical treatises, esoteric manuscripts, and, above all, architecture. Wherever the Templars traveled, it followed, etched into stone, carved into wood, tucked into the folds of cathedral facades. And when the order collapsed, the symbol did not vanish. It merely changed hands. Or perhaps it returned to the hands it had always been awaiting. For if the Templars had a successor, a spiritual inheritor, it was not the church. It was something quieter, more diffuse, ubiquitous. Freemasonry. For centuries, Masonic lore has insisted upon its roots in ancient builder guilds, masons who constructed cathedrals and transmitted sacred geometry through whispered codes. However, buried deeper within that tradition is a murkier legacy. Legends of a hidden lineage that survived the Templar purge. A line of knowledge that retreated underground, resurfacing not in swords and banners, but in aprons and gavels, not in fortresses, but in lodges. Historians scoff at this notion. Freemasonry, they argue, emerged in the 17th century, long after the Templars were extinguished. But what if that timeline is an illusion? What if, like a dormant seed, the essence of Templar knowledge simply awaited new soil? There is no direct document linking the two orders, no scroll-stamped property of the temple, but the echoes are undeniable. Begin with the rituals. Freemasonic initiation bears uncanny resemblances to what little is known of Templar practices. The oath of secrecy, the symbolic death and rebirth, the emphasis on the inner temple rather than the outer one. Then there are the titles: Master, Grand Architect, knight names that feel more like inheritance than invention, and the symbols they read like a lexicon of Templar memory: the double-headed eagle, the compass and square, the all-seeing eye. These are not merely abstract motifs. They form a language, a code, one that traces its roots not to Enlightenment rationalism, but to medieval mysticism filtered through the dust of Jerusalem and the silence of hidden vaults. But of all these symbols, none holds more weight than the Seal of Solomon, said to represent the union of opposites, fire and water, heaven and earth, male and female. It is the architecture of balance. To the Templars, it may have held a deeper significance. Some suggest they recovered scrolls beneath the temple that describe this seal not merely as a magical sigil, but as a diagram of reality itself, a way of perceiving the cosmos, a map of the divine structure, encoded not in words, but in shape. The seal's geometry reflects the Vesica Piscis, a form sacred to both Kabbalists and early Christians, symbolizing creation through the intersection of opposites. Templar churches and Freemason lodges alike are often designed according to this proportion. Coincidence, perhaps, but when one observes its repetition in stained glass, in floor plans, and in ceilings where stars have been mapped according to invisible harmonics, one begins to sense it is more than aesthetic. One Masonic legend recounts the story of Hiram Abiff, the master builder of Solomon's temple, murdered for refusing to reveal the secrets of the craft. It is a peculiar narrative, until one realizes it mirrors the fate of Jacques de Molay, the Templar Grand Master, who died rather than disclose the order's hidden truths. Both are guardians of something sacred. Both are silenced. Both live on in ritual. Even the structure of Masonic degrees ascending levels of initiation, each revealing new knowledge, feels eerily similar to how the Templars may have guarded what they found in Jerusalem. Knowledge dispensed in careful measures, not to control, but to protect. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was overwhelming. Of course, none of this definitively proves a direct lineage, but perhaps lineage is not the essential point. Perhaps the Templar current flowed underground for centuries, permeating minds sufficiently receptive to carry it forward. After all, truth does not always require continuity. Sometimes it only needs resonance, and resonance echoes. Across Europe, Freemasons financed revolutions, designed cities, and founded nations. They encoded symbols into architecture, into currency, into entire political systems, all while claiming to serve a higher order, not a religion, not a nation, but a principle, the great architect, the universal light. Where did they acquire that vocabulary? One theory suggests that after the Templar Purge, surviving members dispersed into guilds, monasteries, and trade networks. There, they integrated their knowledge into the working world, camouflaging mysticism as craftsmanship. A keystone, a compass, a lodge, each just mundane enough to avoid suspicion, each just sacred enough to carry the memory. There is a story, never verified but difficult to disregard, that Benjamin Franklin, a known Freemason, once received a sealed box from a French lodge claiming descent from the Templars. Inside was a single piece of parchment, written in cipher. No one ever deciphered it. Franklin apparently stored it in his private library where it eventually disappeared. What was in the box? No one knows. But a letter that accompanied it contained 6 words. The temple never fell. It folded. And perhaps that is the essence of it. The Templars did not vanish. They adapted. They became less visible, more enduring. Their fortress transformed into a blueprint. Their oaths became ritual. Their treasure, whatever it was, became an idea passed not through fire but through fellowship. And the Seal of Solomon, it still rotates in floor tiles, in stained glass, in quiet rituals beneath cities that no longer remember why they tremble. But you remember, because now you have heard its echo. It was never merely gold, never merely relics. What the Knights Templar uncovered beneath Solomon's temple, if the echoes, the architecture, the silence, and the scattered clues are to be believed, was something far more challenging to possess and far more perilous to comprehend. It was knowledge, but not the kind contained in books. It was a design, a pattern, a glimpse behind the curtain of religion into the architecture of something older, more elemental, cosmic law drawn in angles and light. They discovered something that redefined the meaning of sacred, something that challenged the monopoly of divine authority. Perhaps ancient texts, perhaps a relic that functioned not as an idol, but as an instrument, perhaps a scroll that did not describe God, but described how to perceive God without a priest or a pulpit or explicit permission. And so they pledged themselves to silence, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because they understood that the power of what they carried lay not in proclaiming it, but in protecting it. They encoded it in stone, transmitted it in code, preserved it in myth, and buried it in structures that still resonate with silent music. Then they vanished, or seemed to, but their silence took root. It whispered through cathedrals, echoed in Freemason lodges, hid in altars and arches. The trail never